afford to live in. Calvary United Methodist Church. LaGree Baptist Church on 125th Street, which will be mega condos for people who probably don't look like us and can afford to be there when we can't afford to, and our kids can't afford to have apartments in those in that building. St. Martin's Episcopal Church, the Episcopal Diocese, chain locked the vestry board out of the church because they refused to take a loan for them to repair the church belfry, when in fact they needed money to address other maintenance issues in the church. The diocese wanted, as a condition of giving this loan, a multi-million-dollar loan to the church, collateral of their additional properties that the church owns and that the diocese does not own. So we are afraid that perhaps that church is going to fall prey to maybe the wrecking ball or another kind of use. And when I say another kind of use, let's talk about St. Thomas the Apostle Church, which it's a Roman Catholic church that the diocese sold at the, after great protests by the community and the people who went to the church. It is now an event space. And someone I know who does an annual event went to see about the space because it has a big online presence, and to use it for the day is $12,000.
Yep.
And this organization used Carnegie Hall last year for $6,000 and thought it was a whole lot of money. So here we go. Who is it for?
Right.
It's not for our community to have events. St. Luke's Episcopal Church, which is the sister church to St. Martin's, is threatened. Metropolitan AME Church, All Saints Roman Catholic Church, it's gone. It's sitting there because it's landmark, so they can't knock it down. So I assume that there's going to be some other kind of use that will come up, maybe an event space again. But anyway, then we have Commandment Keepers Ethiopian Hebrew Synagogue, which was sold from under the congregants, unbeknownst to them, for some ridiculously low price.
Wow.
And now it was sold to developers, but now it's owned by two private individuals who are restoring it and doing a beautiful restoration job, but it's a private house. Anyway, so, and then to end, Metropolitan Community United Methodist Church, which Derrick will discuss a little later on. We have, as an organization, we're a preservation organization. We're a young preservation organization. We organized in 2015, and we've done a lot in the 3 years that we've been active. And our latest success, of which Michael Adams would disagree, he's also a co-founder, is that we got a district 130 to 132nd Street designated as a landmark, and it was an important neighborhood because it housed the building where the March on Washington was planned. It has the oldest black musical association in the country, housed in it, NAMA. Many of you might know it, but some important musicians in the 1900s, in the early 1900s, formed this association because African American musicians could not get licenses to be able to perform in the cabarets and the clubs in New York City, so they formed their own union. and they've owned this house since the early 1920s. And it's still there, and it's important that that history be preserved, and they still do performances there. But a lot of other uses, and one was a stable that was built as a stable. It's a garage, and the current owner wanted it taken out of the district before it was approved by the city council. And thanks to the help of Manhattan Borough President Gale Brewer, who worked with us,
we were a tag team like you can't imagine.
we were able to keep that building in the district, and it was finally signed off on in September of 2018. So this is Harlem's latest historic district, and we want to, it's a start. It's a very small district. We had given LPC, the Landmarks Preservation Commission, a list of 8 neighborhoods and 8 individual landmarks, and they chose the smallest one and even dwindled it down to do that. But that's not stopping us. We want to continue, but some feel that at the rate we're going, that it might, like I might not be alive to see it through. But we have to keep pushing and doing that, and because only 3.6% of Harlem's properties and neighborhoods are landmarked, while in Greenwich Village 2/3 of the neighborhood is landmarked. The Upper West Side, 50% of the neighborhood is landmarked. Why is that? I mean, we need to talk about that and discuss that, but also we as people who reside in this neighborhood need to advocate for more landmarks. But it's becoming increasingly difficult as developers have discovered all of a sudden that Harlem is a desirable neighborhood to develop. However, people come to Harlem. They come to Harlem to discover or to experience the history. They come to Harlem to experience the music and the art and the religious worship that is unique to African Americans in the African American cultural mecca of this country. And if these buildings are removed and we then get oversized high-rises, there's no reason to come here. What's different about being on 3rd Avenue in Harlem? So I'm going to stop now because we have a lot more to discuss, and I just wanted to give you an overview of what's happening in the neighborhood with respect to churches.
Thank you, Valerie. Thank you so much. We've been joined by our senator. He's going to pass, and so we're going to go right on to our borough president.
Thank you. I'll try to. First of all, thank you very much. It's an honor to be here. This is a really, really important topic, and to work with Valerie, Joe, and others is incredibly important because you have to have that on-the-ground knowledge. But let me just give you. I know Ann Friedman from Landmarks Conservancy was not able to be here. All of us know her. She's kind of like the keeper of some of this information. So just to give you overall figures, there are in New York City 248 faith-based under LPC, that's citywide. Wow, and there are 130 individual landmarks, faith-based, and 118 faith-based in historic districts. And others on the panel could be more specific, but basically those two are under the LPC umbrella. So in Manhattan, this is really frightening numbers. In Manhattan, we have 913 parcels that are classified as religious facilities. But between 2013 and 2018, to pick up on what Valerie stated, 106 sales of unique religious facilities just in those few years. Of the 106, 25 were in mid to high density zoning districts, which means they can go up. And the only 263 of the 913 in Manhattan are protected as individuals or in historic districts, just to give you some numbers. So 650 in the borough of Manhattan religious facilities are not protected by any kind of historic designation. And of the 650 religious facilities not protected by historic designation, 196 are zoned to mid to high zoning districts, which means R8. That means you can go high. And again, it may not be all of Harlem, but if you're on an avenue, watch out if you're not under protection, because that's where you get into the problems in terms of height. So much thanks to, I see Pat Moore-John here from Board 9 and Board 10. Both organizations have been trying hard to think of ways, and I know that this conference, thanks to Cordell, will even go further. So we've had at least 3 or 4 faith-based organizational meetings, because it's a Harlem issue, it's a Lower East Side issue, the same kind of problem, and we're gonna work with all of you in the community boards, I hope, to do more Upper Manhattan houses of worship, how to support these institutions, because the real estate values are rapidly increasing, as you heard earlier. One of the problems is, just to give you some examples of what we have tried to do. I can tell you in the past decade, as you heard from Valerie, Harlem has lost at least 20 churches to the tune of over $50 million, according to publicly registered property transaction records. But we know that Harlem has lost much more than $50 million because of the ways in which the luxury condos have come in, and they're nothing but eyesores to the community. That's me speaking. One of the issues is, what do we do? So I just want to give you a couple of examples where we're trying to do something positive, because none of this is easy. I think one of the ways I can say on the Upper West Side, we had a church that was not landmarked, despite all of the fumes and irritation from rabbis, ministers, and priests. I managed to landmark it. Let me tell you the challenge. It is an $11 million restoration, right? When these churches fall apart, they really fall apart. That was in the mid-2000s. It is now 2019. They just got, because they have no, just like other churches, they don't have a large congregation, but they managed to make it an art center. And working since the mid-2000s till now with an art organization and a nonprofit, repurposing, I think is what it's called. West Park Presbyterian, 86 and Amsterdam. They now have $1 million for the roof, some of which came from Ann Friedman, $10,000. That's just a small bit from Landmarks Conservancy. But the fact of the matter is, because you are a religious, no reso-a, no state money, nothing can go to this building. So just to give you the challenges that a small congregation faces. So that's one. St. Paul and St. Andrew is 86 and West End. It was landmarked a long time ago, despite ministers, congregations never want to be landmarked. So you have to fight it. And in this particular case, we made the basement a condo. So because there is a pantry in there so that people can get food. So we took the kitchen, this took me 5 years, but we made the kitchen a condo. Then I could give the kitchen funding from the city. And the state was able to give them money for the ADA, for the ramp. So you have to figure out what you can do differently. So the food kitchen, basically for those who are hungry, has a pantry and, you know, all the ways in which you can be supportive of those who need food insecurity or food insecure. However, no religious activities can take place in the kitchen. There is a waiting room, and actually that's not the condo, just the kitchen. So you can have sort of, you can't have any religious activity, you have a dinner down there. You have to be very careful. All you need is one infraction on your nonprofit, and the whole thing falls apart. In addition, this particular building, it is huge, like St. Martin's, has a synagogue, a shared space. But even with all of that, it took them like 10 years to fix the roof. Just to give you the challenges, because the cost of these things is very, very high. Now, on the Lower East Side, Nativity and St. Emmerich's is kind of like the situation with St. Martin's and St. Luke's. They're Catholic churches. Empty, nobody's there. So we met with the church, and just to give you all the challenges, the one of them, the St. Emmerich's, has 300,000 square feet. It's huge. So Catholic Church is going to do 100% affordable housing, but the community thinks it's not enough, they could use more of the space. We have to fight that. In addition to the fact they're going to do something, you want them to do more. They're going to take the other site and sell it for the highest bidder for condos. Is that a good thing, a bad thing? How do we fight it? These are the issues that we're constantly dealing with in terms of individual churches. I just want to comment on St. Martin's and St. Luke's. Thanks to Valerie, Joe, and to Michael, we're very aware of it. So we have been meeting with the group, unfortunately not the one who were the original vestry, ones appointed by the bishop. So help me God, I hate to have any church go. Everybody knows me. I'm the worst preservationist because I would preserve everything. So in this particular case, we think we're going to have a way to preserve both. We're going to find a way to pay back the bishop, even though he must have enough money.
Truly.
Okay, we're going to find a way to pay back the bishop, but at the same time have affordable housing on St. Luke's and keep the church. We have met with everybody imaginable, and we're going to put together a package working with the community. So I just want to say there's lots of possibilities there, but if the bishop had his way, it would be sold already for condos and he'd have his money. So I guess my point is every single one of this is a challenge. Now, air rights, that's a whole other world. If you look at East Midtown, that's what people are looking toward. I was the author of that rezoning. And in East Midtown, which is around Grand Central, what we did was for St. Patrick's, St. Bart's, and Central Synagogue, and other landmarks. If you're a landmark in that area, like from 42nd up to 54th Street-ish, you can sell your air rights anywhere in East Midtown. So that gives the landmarks the opportunity not to build over them, around them, but to sell nearby. So now other faith-based want that, but if you do that, you have to be careful. Because the next thing you know, it may be not on Valerie's block, but on your block, or Williams' block, you'll end up with a tall, ugly building. Yep. Because everybody says, I want to sell my air rights so then I can keep my mission and my building. I said, that's fine, but then the tall building's going to go on Williams' block. So that's a discussable topic that has to come up. The churches under Judson, which is one of the churches near NYU, are all meeting constantly, churches and synagogues, because they want to have a larger location in which to sell the air rights. So is that a good thing or a bad thing? How do we fathom all of that? Because so many of these institutions have very dwindling congregations, and they do not have, I think I gave you some numbers on the cost of renovating these buildings that have not had any infrastructure. The senator probably knows more about the New York State National Register, but it is interesting that if you are already landmark historic district, you can get on, or even without, you can get on the New York State National Register. Then you can get the state grants, REDC state grants. However, very few get them. So you could do all this work, hire somebody to write the grant, you may not get it. Unitarian Universalist on 76 and Central Park West did get the $500,000 last year, but it's my understanding from Ann Friedman, the state may know more, that they give it to very few. So one of the issues would be every single Harlem church that's eligible should be registering for this. And then we should fight that it not just be one church that gets the REDC grant, but more churches get the REDC grant, because you can do a lot with $500,000.
Yes.
And so this is a possibility. One of the problems with landmarks, the congregation and the faith leader have no say in it. I will tell you, be honest with you. And so we work around them because they don't want to be landmarked. The problem with the New York State National Register is that the faith leader and the congregation have to agree to go on to apply. So that's sometimes a deterrent, because the last thing they want is to do that. In terms of repurposing, I think we have to be very careful. You heard from Valerie one example, so that's another topic that needs a lot of discussion. I think I'll leave it there. I think you get a sense that these are all incredibly important. Each church has a different story. Each synagogue has a different story. We have a synagogue on 93rd Street. I tried, I lost. It's beautiful, torn down, and it will be mission. This mission makes me crazy because they want the mission on the first floor and then the condos above. And you do hear rabbis and ministers and priests who want, I've been in the room and they said they want the penthouse and they're sorry they got the second floor.
Always do that.
I know, and it's hard because these may be decent, lovely people, but they have another side to them, so we say.
Thank you.
And that's it, but thank you very much for including me.
Thank you, and thank you, Gail. I just wanted to say one quick thing, and thank you, Gail. That's a lot of information that we got. the other presenters, I'm gonna ask y'all to be just a little shorter.
I'm sorry.
But no, it was necessary, and you certainly fed us a lot. I wanna just say that in terms of the, National Register, we were expecting, Commissioner Camara here today, but I know there are a number of workshops, that he's, assigned to, so he may not have been able to get here. But I wanted to mention something about our next speaker. I also wanted to say, Gale, you said something about churches not wanting to be landmarked, and I think there's a lot of education that's necessary about landmarking. Because I think when you say landmark, churches get immediately frightened, and not because they're horrible people and they don't believe in preserving history, but I think they're afraid of what that means in terms of changes they can make to their building, or, you know, that may be very expensive for them to restore and like that. But we need to provide resources and education for them to do that. Our next speaker, of course, is our great Senator, Brian Benjamin, but I wanted to say something about him before he says something, because Valerie Bradley talked about her and Gale's work on this, and you know, Valerie is my boss, so she calls me and she says, "Oh my God, this is gonna happen, and yeah, Stephanie, we have a seat for you right here. Come on in. Come on in, we have a seat." And I remember calling Senator Benjamin at the crack of dawn. I don't think the roosters were up yet that morning. And telling him that there was gonna be a vote down at the city council. And he got up out of his bed, and he got dressed, and he was down at that city council, okay? Yes, and please, no, give me a round of applause. Because what was happening was that, you know, the city council was going against our council members' wishes, which is unusual, and
Quite.
I don't understand how that could ever be, because he had supported landmarking that district. Councilman Bill Perkins, he did support that, and the committee that was getting ready to vote against him, so we did a Hail Mary, you know, it was more than a double team. Many of us had to get involved and go down several times, but that's how our community has to be active and on the case. And we reminded them that not only do you need to go with the council person of the district, but you go with the people who elected him, and the people, and that was us. So that was a part of that victory, but I just wanted to point out, and I also do want to mention someone else in the room who was very key in that, Indigo Washington, who is staff to our council member, Inez Barron, who also sat on that committee and took my calls and talked to her colleagues and talked to other members. So, you know, this is a city-wide issue. And
who sat by the door.
There you go. So, you know, it took a lot of effort and a lot of planning. So I just want to thank you, Brian, for being responsive like that.
Thank you. First of all, Cordell says that Valerie's her boss. Well, Cordell's my boss. That means that ultimately Valerie's my boss. I didn't really fully get that until now, but now I'm glad I got that linkage together. I just want to make a point to Cordell's point. I think when Cordell called me, and I remember that call, there's a level of integrity and respect that I have for Cordell that I didn't have to do a lot of research on what she was calling me about. I immediately called the speaker's office. I called the speaker himself, but and said, "Look, this is going on. What's going on?" "Oh, I don't know," and you know, and then all of that. But I think it's important that we work together. Regardless of, you know, I know everyone doesn't agree with everybody on every single issue, right? But to the borough president's point, one reason why I wanted to go before me, even though I'm stressed for time, is because I knew she's going to have all the information. You know, our borough president is on top of the details, and I know that she is very committed to keeping our community safe.
Yes.
I see two issues here, and one issue I see is a number of our churches who are just losing membership and are struggling to figure out how to keep their churches alive. Yeah. If you don't have a big membership, Sunday alone isn't going to cut it. And I think to the point, you know, we need to try to figure out how we can work with our churches who don't want to sell out, who want to stay, who want to be members of the community and provide. how can we be helpful to some of the points that you were referencing, whether it's now that we control the state senate, there's another pot of money that's out there. How can we work together to try to protect our churches who want to still survive, and then they can be landmarked? Then there's a separate issue, which is there's an economic factor that a number of folks are looking at. Hey, you know what? My church is dwindling. I want to sell out. They want to make money. How do we deal with that? And I think the question is, that's a conversation I think we have to have with some of our church leaders. I mean, we can't have it around them. And so one of the things one of the reasons why I wanted to help to be a sponsor of this, because I said to Cordell, I hope this is the beginning of a conversation.
Absolutely.
That
Absolutely. It is.
that can lead to us having roundtables and conversations with our churches who are impacted and who are concerned. There are churches making decisions right now that with not full information.
Yeah.
Some folks don't know, oh, wait a minute, there is an option besides just taking this call, someone just showing up in my office with a bag of money. There is some state money, there is some city money, there's something, well, federal, Jesus, but, you know, whatever. Who knows? But that's what I'm committed to doing. I think that's what we're all committed to doing. But the only way we do that is we do that together, and we try to make sure that we protect harm for now and into the future. So that's what I'm committed to doing. And thank you, Cordell, for your leadership on this and on so many other issues.
Thank you. And you know, he just segued into what we were gonna talk about later, because I don't just have these things to have them. You know, this homework, there are assignments. And since we started talking about this, we've talked about how we have to form some sort of a group and discussion ongoing in Harlem, because that's where we live, and that's our little village. And we're going to, after, take this to the community. So this is just the first step to get it out there. We wanna discuss, but we realize that this is something that requires our attention. And we're gonna have another discussion in the community ongoing about how we protect our churches.
And whatever you need from my office.
Thank you.
You run the office anyway, but whatever you need from the office in terms of everything, we're all in.
Thank you so much. I'm gonna just ask, I wanna save, Michael and Derrick for last, but I do wanna talk to, I want the AG's office to respond to some of the other things that are going on with our churches. Do that.
So I'm Jim Sheehan, I'm the head of the Charities Bureau of the Attorney General's Office. Kim Ramos is our intergovernmental person, and so part of her role is figuring out what issues really matter in the community and how we can be responsive to it. And so she educates me on a regular basis on things that are out there we need to pay attention to. You'll see so there are three things from us, right? One is a booklet. If you're thinking about a church transaction, there's a booklet over there that you can take and read at your leisure. The second thing is a PowerPoint presentation, which is the Reader's Digest version of that, much shorter. And then there's my discussion today. So I think, thanks Cordell for inviting us, and Senator Benjamin for setting this up. I think there are two things that I got from the Borough President's discussion and from Senator Benjamin's discussion. That is, on the one, you have to think about the impact on the larger community, but that the churches themselves, the houses of worship themselves, have an interest, have a responsibility, and have a mission. And so the way we approach these issues is to say, show us how what you're planning to do with your property satisfies your mission. Tell us how you're going to use the proceeds. Tell us what part of this is the mission that you have. And so one of the quotes I have here is from Luke 16:8. And I raise this because what we're seeing now in Bed-Stuy and in Crown Heights and in Harlem is developers and real estate brokers going around to churches and just knocking on doors and saying, you can, you've been lived on nothing for so long, you can now have $5, $10, $15 million. But the thing that I like about the parable of the unjust steward is for people of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than are people of the light. So when you look at churches dealing with developers, right? Developers do this every day.
That's right.
The church does it once in their lifetime.
That's right.
And so what we see are these awful agreements, right? Where you're giving them your property to the church, and then that's their bank, right? So they go and they mortgage the property, and they do various things with it, and then the question is, what do you have left at the end? And there are a lot of promises in the beginning, but that's not where the documents go. So I'll ask you to look at we always like visuals in the Attorney General's office, and you look at a synagogue up in Inwood, which is slide, I can't, like,
What page is that? Three?
page
Page
three.
three.
Okay, so what you'll see is the Fort Tryon Jewish Center is promised by the developer, and that's the first slide. And the second thing is, the developer went bust, all right? So what happened to the Fort Tryon Jewish Center, which was a relatively thriving congregation? I mean, they had an old building, they didn't maintain it, but this is what happened 8 years later, and they're still in the courts fighting about it. So part of our job is to say, you know, people walk in and they have the developers telling them something, the lawyer for the developers telling them something, and the pastor is saying, we've had no money and now we're gonna have some money. And why are you, State Attorney General, interfering with this by saying, you know, what, sort of fly-specking our documents? We see this so often that, especially in development deals, where the church is gonna be knocked down and then they're gonna have a condo church somewhere in the building, and it sounds great. And then you look and say, it's sort of like movie deals in Hollywood. And after everybody takes out their piece, there's nothing left.
There's nothing left.
And so that's our discussion, that's our education process, that's the conversation we want to have with houses of worship in Harlem and other places. Now, Borough President Brewer talked about the issue of the larger community. Under the First Amendment, I cannot tell a church how they should run their own affairs, right? I can say, you've got to follow your own book of discipline or your own canon law, but I can't say, you know, I think you should spend the money on low-income housing that you get. We can go to court and say, show us how this serves your mission, right? And the court can say, unless you can say it's consistent with your mission, you can't do it. But I cannot say, this is an historic house or a historic house of worship, and therefore you're not allowed to sell, right? That's the law says that's up to the congregation as a whole. So one of the things that we find is, and I have just learned this term this year, steeple-jacking. Ever hear the term steeple-jacking? Okay, so you have a relatively charismatic, or not, pastor who comes into the church. You have an historic church that's been there for 100 years, and the pastor wants to, as they say in the business, monetize the church, right? Turn the church into money for himself or the condo, the penthouse. Right? And so what we look for is one of the things we ask for is you need a vote of 2/3 of your members in order to sell the property. All right? So this is, like some other aspects of politics in Chicago, for example, suddenly there are voters who turn up, right? Or they start loading the membership with people who are going to support their approach.
Members we didn't know
Exactly.
last year.
Exactly. So suddenly they're all
Show your ID card.
right.
Steeple-jacking.
Steeple-jacking. So
I got
you
that.
can take that away today. That's kind of
Repeat after me, steeple-jacking.
Steeple-jacking.
So we look to that issue, and sometimes we make people go through 2 and 3 votes with notices because we don't believe.
Right.
Now, the other reality of churches is people disagree. Some people in the congregation say this has been here 150 years and we want to keep it, and some people say the roof is leaking, the pigeons are in the bell tower, can't do it.
And I can't pay no more time.
And we have to respect the democratic process, assuming that it's undertaken legitimately. Next issue. We require people to disclose in their proposal both the value of the property and what they're going to do with the proceeds. And one question we ask is, do you have a broker? Do you have a consultant? When you close this deal, where's the money going to go? And so we find 3 things that give us pause. Consultants who aren't licensed in any way. We've also found consultants who used to be in securities fraud, but they were kicked out of that business, and now they're in real estate.
Red flag, you think?
Right. or they've been convicted of other things in the recent past, and that's where they are. So then you look to the relationships, right, between the pastor and some of these brokers. So you're seeing, we had one in Brooklyn where the brokers, the pastor's friend was going to get $3 million when this property sold for about $75 million. He said, this guy's not a real estate broker, he has no license, why is he getting $3 million? Well, the pastor promised him he would get it. And who knows what's behind that, but we said, not going to happen, right? We're not going to approve it with this transaction. Here's the next thing. We're very concerned about developers some developers have very deep pockets, and their money sort of, no one knows where it comes from, right? Or it comes from the last 5 transactions, but where did it come from before that? And so what we find is they push the money under the table to the other side, right? So there's an elder, a pastor, a member of the church board who is getting cash or getting a big check. And that's, you know, the question is, how often does that happen and can you prove it?
Right.
But you look at some of the prices, so we see, for example, churches that are sold today for $5 million.
$5.
And then, no, 5 million, and then the next day, the developer sells it to somebody else for 10.
Yeah.
Right? So what's happening there?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, are they just naive, or is there something else going on? And so that concerns us a lot too. So when you look at our handouts, you'll see, you know, we've got the Luke chapter 16. Our job is to look at these transactions to make sure that they're fair to the religious organization, that the church has voted for it and supports it, and that they use the proceeds appropriately. And one of the things we've been trying to encourage is churches becoming involved in moderate income housing, and that's a huge need in Harlem as in other places in the city. Well, it's a huge need everywhere in New York City, but this is an opportunity because there are fewer people attending church, there are fewer congregations. If there's another use for the property, we want them to think about moderate income housing. And so we work very hard to support that, but again, we can't say you must do this. We can say we want to help you get there and there are ways to do it, and we'll do our best. At the end of the PowerPoint, you will see resources. We try to give organizations as much information as possible about this process. And one of the things, if you hire a lawyer to work with you on a church deal, either opposing it or favoring it, they should read the booklet that we just handed out, all right? And often we find lawyers say, it's too much trouble to read it. Just tell me. Well, no, we're not gonna do that. And also, people hire lawyers who don't know anything about transactions. So you have, the developer has somebody who's been doing this for 20 years and has every form and every story, and the church has somebody who does this part-time and is filling in the blanks.
That's right.
Yeah.
So I guess that I've used up my time, Cordell, but the thing to think about here is looking at the faith-based community in New York City and Harlem going forward, we want to make sure that people have the information they need. So I have one more thing. In the next year, the companies that provide cell service and phone service and internet service are going to switch to 5G, right? Here's the impact of that. Guess what the best place to put a cell tower is? Church steeple. Exactly. And it used to be you could put up, you have a cell and it would cover like a quarter mile. These new 5G things have to be put like every 300 feet. All right. So what do we find? That's usually a lease. It's usually a lease. If it's more than 5 years with renewals, we are supposed to approve it. But here's what happens. Verizon comes in. I'm sorry. A miscellaneous telephone company comes in and says, here, we're going to give you $1,000 a year, which you never had before. Sign on the dotted line. Yeah. Do not do that, all right? One of the things I'd like to do going forward is to have just a program on negotiating with the cable companies about this 5G, because it is a huge opportunity for churches, and we want to find ways to allow you to take advantage of it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay. So there's food in the hallway, and we've got 2 more people to hear from. So I'm going to ask them to, do their summaries, and then we're going to probably move right into the food. We're going to help them.
So we can talk.
We can talk
while
we're eating, okay?
And strategize about where we go from here.
And did everybody sign in on the sign-in sheet?
No.
Please make sure you do, because we're gonna contact you when we have the next meeting in Harlem, when we bring that. But thank you so much, James, I really appreciate what you just talked about. Next we're gonna hear from, and we're gonna end the meeting, I wanna hear some suggestions on the air rights. But we're gonna talk to Derrick Taitt, who's a member of Metropolitan Community United Methodist Church.
Good afternoon. One thing I like to say is that what Mr. Sheehan said, his PowerPoint must be about my church. Because so many things that he said, so many accusations seem to fit right in my church. For one, the minister, he came in and he took his time to canvass what was left of the congregation, which was larger than it is now. But he canvassed it, and those that he could convince, he took them into his special prayer group. Now, to be an officer in the church, you have to be a member of his personal prayer group. The average age of the prayer group was about, I'd say, between 75 and 80.
Wow.
A lot of the younger black men have left the church because of disagreement with the pastor.
Yes.
If he speaks about development, he's one of these that talks about his penthouse above the church. And he won't hide it. He tells it straight out. I'm going to have my penthouse above the church. Recently, his wife had whatever architect they were dealing with to call plans back because she said that my bedroom is not big enough. I need a bigger bedroom. This is a man who, you know, one of the major obstacles facing us, we had the church is old, very old, over 150 years. But one of our major obstacles was a few years ago, a hole in the ceiling. Not the roof, but the ceiling. Maybe a 15 by 15 foot hole. A church was sold on Madison Avenue and 114th Street. We were told that monies from that church, not all, but that monies from that church would come to us since their congregation joined ours. We were combined. So we were told money was coming in to fix certain things in the church. Never happened. It never happened, and I was told that it's because the minister didn't want it. He stated to the congregation that he is not here to run a museum. So now he surrounded himself with yes people. He's going forward. No developer would tear the church down in its entirety. All developers wanted to save at least the front of the church. He said, no, I want every single dime out of this deal. So now he has applied. He's given permission by the mother church, which is really City Society at 475 Riverside Drive, if anyone knows about them. They're a wing of the Methodist Church, but they really control Methodist churches in the metropolitan area. They offer you interest-free loans, but once you take that loan, you're in. They got you. They have liens on your church, and they'll loan you enough money to where they actually own your church. They have no problem with that at all. But Metropolitan was one of the few churches in this conference that was owned by the congregation. I found out recently that they had never changed the name of the ownership from Metropolitan Methodist Church. So last year, the minister hurried up and changed it to Metropolitan United Methodist Church so they can make this move. Initially, the church, back in the 1930s, I believe, they split with Emmanuel Church, and they marched across Lenox Avenue to this building. I asked the bishop, well, how come we weren't given the opportunity to march back somewhere? Honestly, if you see there's a division in the church, then we should be given the opportunity to leave the United Methodist fold. Because we didn't start out like that. We became United Methodist under William James. But this man has, he's loaded his deck, he stacked the deck, he stacked the cards, and everything with him is just tear the whole church down. He wants to put the church on adjacent lot that we own. It's 40 feet wide. It's the size of 2 brownstones. Now the church owned these 2 lots plus another lot on 126th Street, which they could have sold to get monies to redo this church. But the mother church probably thought, I'm quite sure they thought this and said, listen, if we sell this property, we can split this money up. There's people within our church that I believe are going to get paid out of this deal. We have a consultant who's not professional, but he's guaranteed $450,000, I believe. And I can see that being split up amongst certain people in the church. You know, and this is just how we're going forward. I'm fighting it all I can, but
Well, the AG will tell him. He said steeple-jacking, your pastor's people-jacking.
And even the point he mentioned about the consultants having other issues. This man has had other issues. He's a convicted rapist.
Oh, jeez.
I can say it because it's true. Convicted in Bergen County. Just copped out last June.
No, this is a consultant, not the pastor.
You said that nervous, you see, so the other people felt that too, right? I think he stopped breathing.
Let's go get him right now. Where's the bus?
Recently, a reporter from the New York Times asked the pastor, or from the Columbia, asked the pastor about this man's background. And the pastor's statement was that, his answer was that the church is about forgiveness. I'd like to ask him, what about the victim? What kind of pastor could this be? You know, but this is how these churches are turning on us, and I don't know what we're going to do. We're fighting, I'm here, but it seems like we may lose this battle. And it's one of the most prettiest churches in East Harlem.
It is
We have
beautiful. It's
chandeliers the size of this room.
It's beautiful. It is so nice.
When it was built, the organ was state of the art. It was the first
Oh, that's the
What's the
church.
name of the church?
This is it
Metropolitan
here.
Community
There's a
United
handout.
Methodist Church.
It's beautiful. I'm gonna ask you guys. Sure. What's his name?
Richard Hayes.
Haynes. Yeah.
Hayes.
Hayes or Haynes. I thought.
Hayes.
Hayes. I thought. I put an N in there. Pastor, 126 in Madison.
Oh, yeah.
Reverend William James, was that him?
That was his church.
And Carl McCall.
And Carl McCall, yes,
Carl
the associate
McCall.
pastor.
And Calvin O. Presley.
Yes,
So
yes,
folks,
yes.
here's what I'm gonna do. Hello? I mean, y'all gotta listen real carefully, cause you know, this is what I do. I solve problems. And, since we got started late, they need to set up the food. They got people out there, but what we're gonna do, we're gonna bring the panelists real close to you. And they're gonna start talking, and we're gonna put this table back here, and they're gonna come in and set up the food while you're talking, okay? So we can just make that transition. Thank you. Sorry. Yeah. Come on in. We're almost done. We gotta,
So you need to move up the table?
yeah, we're gonna move it back a little bit.
We can keep talking
For the 946.
And sometimes if it goes too far, it's not like that we can do.
Thank you. I can't see the whole food. See how long they were. We can sit and then we somebody else. Well, hold on. Let's what's on the case. Yeah, there's someone here. Put the water in.
Good morning, good morning. How are you? Were you on the bus?
No, I was not. I was on the line.
Are you on the line?
Another workshop, so I was trying to come in from the line.
I heard about that line.
Somebody in your staff put all that numbers together, is there somebody you
I can get you. Yeah, I have it all. I just
Okay, no worries. I want my glad.
I have it all. Okay. I didn't want to.
So folks, let's resume. We have one more speaker. Derrick, thank you. Thank you for sharing your story. This is something that I'm very passionate about. Y'all have been meeting. I see you have the Block Association represented here. So this is a good example of where the community has come in because they're concerned. They're concerned about what's gonna happen, what's gonna be on that corner. This is a combination of what the borough president was talking about and the air rights and what can happen. Because once the church leaves, then what's gonna happen to that space? And often what does replace it is something we're not gonna be able to go into. So I wanna hear from our final speaker, Michael Adams, if we can talk a little bit with you. If we can close that door, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. So, it was said earlier that that I tend to dismiss or belittle the amount that we've been able to accomplish at Save Harlem Now. And that isn't true at all. It's just a matter of the fact that at the rate that we are going, if that continues, and if we only are successful at the rate that we have been so far, you might say it's a beginning, but it's pointless, because it won't be that, it isn't that we won't live long enough to see Harlem saved, it's that we will live long enough to see Harlem destroyed completely. And that's what I want to avoid. And so some people would say, well, you know, you're very negative. Well, the reality is, for me, is that when all of the valid reasons that were given for the designation of 3 blocks in the middle of Harlem are just as valid if you go 3 blocks west, or 3 blocks east, or 3 blocks north, or 3 blocks south. And when Greenwich Village was designated, protected, as thoroughly as it has been so far, initially their idea was that they were going to create many little tiny historic districts with a few buildings in it. But the community protested, and the community had sufficient juice, they were able to say, no, we don't want this. And they got many times more than what it was said that they were going to get. Now, even with the borough president working with us for the Metropolitan Community United Methodist Church, our mayor and our Landmarks Preservation Commission say, screw you, we're going to tear that church down. So the problem ongoing is Harlem has no political power to compel the mayor, who controls the Landmarks Commission, to give us what we want. And what do we want? You know, the thing that's so terrible to me as an American is that people talk about this notion of identity politics, and they say, oh, gay people want this, and black people want this. All we want is what white people already have and enjoy: equality, justice. If you have 2/3 of your community in Greenwich Village protected by landmarking, we want that in Harlem. How is Harlem less than Greenwich Village? How? I just was visiting in France, and the thing that it convinces me more than anything is that every day we allow to be destroyed buildings that are just as good as buildings that are in France. The only difference is that because they're so much older, they have 1,000 times more such buildings. So, you know, they could destroy a building a day and still have plenty, but we don't have that. We don't have that. And we are destroying our heritage. The borough president said that that churches don't want to be landmarked, and I would like to just clarify that. From my experience, church leadership, particularly ministers, they don't want to be landmarked generally. But if you talk to individual members of the church, that church is like their home. It is their spiritual home. And so, you know, I'll never forget how one of the churches that I was hoping to get landmarked many years ago was the Memorial Baptist Church. And at the Memorial Church, the minister said to me, he said, oh no, we don't want to be landmarked, that's terrible. And one Easter Sunday I was there and I was talking to his mother, and I said, Mrs. Washington, don't you think that if Abyssinian Church and Mother Zion and St. Patrick's Cathedral are landmarked, that your church deserves to be landmarked too? And she said what I knew she would say. She said, yes, our church is just as good as those other churches, and just as beautiful, just as historic. We should be landmarked too. So I took her over to her son. I said, would you tell your son what you just said to me? Because he said that this is not a good idea. And he then proceeded to say to her, oh no, landmarking, that's bad because they will tell us what we can do and we won't be able to be landmarked. One big problem in terms of churches and their preservation is that landmarking is no panacea and it's very limited. Indeed, because the landmarks law, because the city government does not